Hi everyone, this is the last in a series of tutorials I've been working on for using SketchUp and Twinmotion together. This one is going to focus on plants and it should be a little shorter than the others. Plants are pretty straightforward. There's only several ways to place them. I'm going to start by talking about the library a little bit, going over a few of the categories, and then we'll get right into how you place them, and they're basically placing them individually or mass placing. Mass placing has got two options: painting plants on with a brush or using a plant scattering tool. And each of those has advantages and disadvantages in terms of flexibility. And also, there's been a lot of complaints on the forum about crashing using some of those. Now, I've worked on a lot of models with Twinmotion, and sometimes I've had issues with those, and other times I haven't. I've got a model that's 115 acres and has thousands of plants on it that were all put on with a scatter tool, others put on with a paint tool, and I have not had any crashing problems at all with that. The only issue I've had when I got everything in there, I have tons of detail in it, and I tried to output um, a standalone presenter, it crashes and it won't do that. So, but I can work in the model as much as I want, and it's not an issue. So, just one thing I would caution: as you start putting plants on, save regularly and keep incremental backups of your work. So before you start adding plants, make a copy of your model, add plants into it. You get to a stopping point, save it, make a copy of that at the desktop, and then go back in and keep working on the plants. I wouldn't do the entire model hoping that nothing happens, because there is some serious instability problems that Epic is trying to address, but they still haven't released an update for that. So it's really important that you keep backups of and incremental backups of what you're working on. All right, let's get into it then. The library, first of all, when we open up, we've got our panel on the left. We back all the way out. You can see we talked about materials last time, and now we're going to look at the vegetation tab. There's several categories that we're going to focus on. Just briefly, landscapes is a way that you can drag a landscape in and kind of replace this starting ground over here. And that allows you to actually use some landscape modeling tools to push it up and push it down and smooth it and add irregularities and so forth. I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial. Maybe I'll do another one focused on landscapes itself. We already have this base model that has topo in it from SketchUp, so we don't really need that landscape feature. We can add the same textures and materials onto surfaces, which I've already done. I talked about that last time, but we don't have to add that landscape feature in. All right, the first category let's talk about is trees. Twinmotion 2020 has a really big improvement in the quality of the plants. And if you notice the previews that pop up here, what it also has is aging, so the growth of the plants. As you put a plant in, there's an option to be able to, you could create an animation, for example, of what the plants look like when they're really small to what they look like when they're very mature, from planting to mature growth, which is different than scaling. If you look at some of these previews, you can see that they actually change forms quite a bit as they mature. It's not just a matter of making a bigger version of the tree. It's actually seeing it change its structure and form a little bit as it does that. You can still scale plants, and I'll talk about a technique for using kind of a combination of growth and scaling to get some variation. And the reason for that is there's not a huge selection of plants. You know, if you talk about deciduous trees, evergreen trees, deciduous shrubs, evergreen shrubs, ground cover, flowers, and then you're trying to cover the gamut of all the different planting zones. It's just, there really isn't a huge selection. So quality is really great. So you have to be a little creative about how you use these plants. Sometimes you might pick a plant that's not appropriate, like a guava or a pomegranate tree. The site's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so those aren't going to grow there. But if you put them in the right place and use them the right way, they can be really effective, because you're really kind of using this. I see this as a modeler right now to be able to kind of generically say, I want a large deciduous shade tree that has coarse leaves or fine leaves. And that's kind of the way you have to approach plant selection. We back up, we've also got the bushes category, which again is fairly limited. This bush base is a good generic deciduous type shrub. For evergreens, there's actually a mugo pine in the trees category. I'm not sure why they categorize it as a tree, but it's I guess the dwarf version, you can scale this down and it kind of, again, makes a good generic shrub. So those two I use a lot. I mean, there's a lot of ferns and tropical plants which aren't really useful for most modeling in a temperate climate like we are here. But you just, again, some of these could function as ground covers. There's some flowers here, sunflowers, and you can, you know, work with these as kind of generic forms. There's another shrub here that works pretty well. So again, you have to kind of do your best to pick the ones that work for the basic kind of plant types that you want, even if it's not species specific. There are also a couple categories, some rocks you can put down. They also change each time you place one of these. It creates a little variation, just like it does. It's one of the things with the plants. Every time you place a tree, it creates a variation of that tree. It's not just a replica. It's not like copying and pasting or duplicating it. It's actually different each time you place it. Detail grasses you don't really need to worry about. They are kind of a carryover from the old version. They don't actually work with the paint or scatter functions anyway, so I'm sure they'll be phased out eventually. Miscellaneous, if you're working on a kind of forest, natural type of environment, these could probably be useful. I got an example, another project I'm working on here, inspired by a late 1800s painting by a Russian painter named Ivan Shishkin, and you can use some of those features. You can see some of the dead plants here and logs that have fallen over. So again, depending on the context that you're working on, that they may be useful. But for most design, there's a hedge in here and some climbing ivy and some dead leaves if you want to add some kind of natural variation. But again, be careful how you use these. You can see that repetition occur if you use them too much within the same scene. All right, so let's talk about placing. The first and easiest way to place plants is simply to do exactly that. Just place them, and you simply go in, pick a plant like this sweet birch, and just click wherever you want that object placed. And if I move over again, spin around a little bit, you can see that I am getting a variation for each of those plants. When you're done, just hit the escape key, and I usually click up in the sky somewhere to deselect it. One thing you will notice, and I'll bring this out maybe as I'm doing, is occasionally as you're placing plants, the navigation gets a little squirrely because it's trying to focus on where the plant is. I'm not sure what causes it, but if you can't spin around to get to a location where you can see where you want to place the plant, then just cancel out with the escape key, click in the sky, reorient your view, and then pick up the plant again over here and start placing it. Sometimes you may need to do that. And you can see that it creates a nice natural variation between each of these. Now, if you don't like one, like maybe this end plant's a little too big right there, well, I can select it and go down here and adjust the age, which again adjusts the branching structure and things like that. Or you can see when I select it, I've got this gizmo here. It's kind of gumball. And if I hit the tab key, it will cycle through 3 different options. So this one allows me to move it and rotate it. If you move a plant or some objects with this, it will snap to the normal of the surface. If you move the plant here, it doesn't make much difference because it's pretty flat. But if you move it with this area, it will just keep it vertical in its correct position. Of course, you can always grab these and rotate them a little bit if you want a little variation of tilt on them. If you hit the tab key till you see the squares, this is the scaling. So I can, if I want this form exactly the way it is, but I just want it smaller, I can use that tab key to do that. Again, click up in the sky, and I can see what that does at the once I'm finished with it. Let's see. Oh, just one thing I'm reminded of, organization reminder. I have this set up, but I didn't use it. So let's go back up to the top. I mentioned this in my earlier tutorials. Right now, I set up a plants folder, and I have plants placed, and I have trees, deciduous, evergreen, and shrubs. So right now, I wasn't using that. I'm going to select these and drag them into trees, deciduous. And then if I wanted to place some shrubs, let's use some of those Mugo pines, I'm going to select this and choose Set Active Container. So now if I come back, let's go down here, and I pick some of these, and I'd say I want to have these kind of a screen across here. Okay, you can see that all those now are ending up inside my shrubs folder, which is exactly what I want. Again, now I can come in here and adjust these, and that's nice about the individual placement. If I come in here and say, okay, well, it does create some random variation, and what I really want is this one to be a little bigger, then you can select that, and you can just change that growth pattern on there, and maybe you do that for like another one here. Make that a little smaller, and if you need to adjust their position, that is the advantage of using individual placement. You've got a lot of flexibility in where you put them and how you can adjust them. As you'll see when you paint or use a scatter, some editing is possible, but you can't go in and pick individual plants and move them around. So for most site scale work, individual placement is probably the preferred method of at least starting out and approaching this. You may, I'll show you some instances where the other methods are maybe work better. And also, as you'll see, placing individual really small plants, the painting tool and the scatter tool just doesn't really work very well. At least if you want to create a dense planting bed, say plants that are placed 6 inches on center, 12 inches on center, those tools, as the way they are now, they simply can't do that. And I'll demonstrate what they're really designed for. All right, so placing is pretty straightforward. Again, picking the plants, think about the design qualities that you're looking for. You're not going to find every exact plant species you want. Also, think about foreground and background. Some plants that maybe are inappropriate in terms of their specific species would be fine as background plants because they're just creating a barrier. You see them as a texture and a form, and that's all you're going to see. So really think about it from a design standpoint and come up with kind of a strategy. Try out some of the different plants, but don't just place any plant you can find in there in your model up front if it's really inappropriate for the context that you're working on. Again, we can't have everything we want right now, but you can make good decisions that'll make it believable and communicate the design qualities that you're looking for. All right, let's talk about mass placing now. As I mentioned, we've got a painting approach and a scatter approach. The painting approach is kind of one step up from this, where I can select some plants, and instead of clicking once to place an individual plant, I can click and paint and place more plants with that. Now, again, part of the issue is, and I'll show you where you get to that, it's down here in the context options, and I'm going to go to vegetation paint. And the interface changes so that now the trees pop up, and I'm going to demonstrate this first with shrubs, and I'm going to drag this shrub base in here. So you click and drag to kind of load up your palette of plants that you want to use, and you can put as many plants in here as you want. In fact, if you want to increase the density, it's kind of a silly way to do it in my opinion, but if you want to increase the density, you just keep dragging copies of the same shrub in here. That's one way you can do it. Now, there is a density adjustment over here, but let's say, maybe I'll pick up one of those other shrubs down here. Yeah, this one, put that in there. So this is the mix, but it also does affect the density, and that's the same method we'll use in the scatter. In fact, in the scatter method, that's the only way you can do it. But then you have to come in here and shift select all these, or you can click on one and use Control to click the ones that aren't contiguous in the list. So that tells Twinmotion what do you want to paint with. Now here's where I can step this density up. Once I have those selected, let's put it, 66%. Then when I click my brush, I have the option to adjust my brush size. So right now I'm going to cover up half my plaza with this. So I'm going to take this, and you can also select this and just type in 5 feet, whatever your units are. And now I've got a smaller size. Maybe I go with 8, hit enter. And now I'm going to come down in here and just paint these on. And what you'll see is that little preview popping up. And it doesn't mean there's going to be a plant at every one. With these, they fill in fairly good. That's not looking too bad. But again, when you kind of try and get, you can't perfectly place them everywhere. It randomly fills those in a little bit. Okay, so let's maybe stop there, hit the escape key. And again, now when I click on that, you can see, again, here's my painted vegetation, and I've got it in the wrong place. I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to open this up, drag it down to painted shrubs. Okay, so when I select that, I get all those plants selected, and I can't really go in and move individual ones around. However, over here where I'm definitely overlapping into the parking lot, I can come down here and say, okay, I'm going to select all these plants to make sure it gets all of them, grab the eraser, and then come in here and kind of get those out of there. And maybe I want to move that one out. The rest of those don't look too bad. You pull that one out. And then if you need to, you could go back in with the paint with the individual placement tool and fill in some gaps if necessary. But if you have a large area of shrubs, that, you know, those two work pretty good. Now, see if I can do this an example. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, I'm going to go back up here. Let's go to here to our Mugo Pine paint. You can see here I'm painting all around this and nothing happens. It doesn't matter how much I paint on that. It's giving me all those little preview marks, but it just simply isn't designed to do closer spacing. So that's, again, one of those things you have to work around. And the smaller shrubs fill in better. Wait a minute. Yeah, there's 30% density. So we can increase that, and you can see it's popping a couple more up, but it just doesn't fill it in. So if you have a situation like that, you just have to work around it and go in, and it doesn't take very long to do individual placements. You could do multiple scatter groups, and if I wanted to create a second scatter group, I just need to click on another folder, go back to here, multiple paint groups, select that. And let's gonna try dragging like 3 of these into here, setting my density way up, getting my paintbrush, and you can see now that it's giving me that preview. There's lots of, but it just simply isn't putting anything in there. And again, it's designed to work at the forest scale, and it can't understand that. So you can see how over here that worked a little bit, but over here it's not working. So if that's the case, just use individual plant placement if you have larger areas. So for example, let me get out of this and go to plants, painted trees, select active container. I'm going to pick a new, and let's see, I'm just going to go with sweet birch and European mountain ash. And then I'm going to spin around here and see this big hillside over here. It's kind of part of the context. Now that's a place where this really comes through. I'm going to set my density up, choose my brush, set this diameter up. Now I've got this pretty big, and I can just paint that whole hillside in, and it's quite amazing and wonderful to be able to fill those plants in that quickly. Come down here, deselect this. I can go back and click on both of these and set that up even more. I can click on the settings, and since growth is on, I can adjust the maturity up and fill that in. So remember too, Twinmotion is always trying to be as efficient as possible. So if you are looking at this from a distance and it doesn't look like much, hit the escape key, move out, and then zoom in on it, because as you get in closer, you'll see that those trees are kind of filling in, and it's a lot denser than it looks from a distance, because it's saving GPU time by thinning things out when you're not close enough to see the detail. Okay, so that's the painting options. And again, you can always come in and grab the painted and change the density. You can delete things. You can adjust the settings. Now, we leave growth on, so if you want to do this growth animation later, it allows you to do that in the images area before you export it. Wind is on. It means the leaves and trees are going to blow a little bit in the wind, which you generally keep on. I guess if you were going to do a bringing in importing models, actually these trees here are not Twinmotion trees. I got them on Turbo Squid. They're very detailed. They're really nice, but they're not animated. And so in Twinmotion, they're not going to blow in the breeze anyway. So if you were doing a composition with Twinmotion and outside trees that you imported, you might want to turn the wind off just so they're not animated, because otherwise some trees move and some trees don't. Okay, let's do the last section on plant scattering. And this one is a new feature that really could save a lot of time, but again, it's got some limitations. I'm going to come into this planting bed in front of the stage here to demonstrate this. So I'm going to go back. Let's get myself organized. I'm at plants, scattered, and let's do ground cover. So I'm going to right click and say set active container. Now I'm going to move up here, go down to my bushes folder, and let's pick these. So again, now scatter, it is important. The more you drag in here, oh, sorry, I've got to click on this. Go to vegetation scatter, which again, it defaults to the grass folder because this will scatter grass on a wide area. So if this was just going to be an open lawn area, I could come in here and just drag this and long grass 4 down, select that and that, click here, and just click on that, and it's going to fill in that grass. And that's, you know, for that kind of purpose, it works really well. Again, the grass is not going to be visible from, hit the escape key, it's not going to be visible from a long distance, but now I've got a mix of those grasses that are filled in really nice. Again, you get a little stragglers around the edge. One way to deal with this, if you're trying to get really precise edges, of course I can come back and delete this, but I didn't do it on this one. But if you want to get this a little better, what I would do is before you bring this into Twinmotion, do an offset of this form before you drape it in SketchUp. And if you offset it back maybe a foot, 6 inches to a foot, and then give the front section a different material. That way, when you can fill in the grass on the material that's on the interior, and if it overlaps this far, it will kind of bleed out to the edge of the curve. You have to do a little trial and error to figure out what that distance is, but it will eliminate the grass hanging over the curb here, and that's kind of an easy technique to fix that. So it defaults to grass because it works really good with grass. Again, I think that's what it was designed to do. But if we back up here, let's go back to our scatter. And here, I'm going to do a combination of things here. The first one, oops, let's go past it. First one is going to be these. I'm going to drag like 2 sets of each of them. This is definitely necessary with smaller plants. If you just put one of these in there, it will never fill in. So I'm going to do that first, and then come in here and click on this. And you can see I just click and it's adding that to it. But again, it's pretty sparse. I don't have a way to say I want this density. I just have to sit here and keep clicking and clicking. And I've done this for quite a while, and it will never fill it in completely. So the kind of the technique, the workaround to this is, you know, you can click for a while, come down here, pick ground cover, go back here, select your vegetation scatter, get back out of the grass folder, back into here, and do the same thing. Drag these down here. Which again is one of the things I'm going to put in a request for because this is kind of ridiculous. All right, then I'm going to select all these. Select this, and now I'm doing a new vegetation scatter, and it will start filling that in. But still, you can see by the time I do this 5 times or whatever it takes, I could probably place those plants in there individually. And each time I have to go back up to another folder, restart the vegetation scatter, come back here. Now this time I'm going to get down to these other set of plants, and I'm going to drag these iris in here. Just to mix it up a little bit. Okay, now I come back and click. Now they're a little bigger and they're starting to fill in. So, you know, that may save you some time, but still, again, hit escape, come in here. I hope in the future that will be super easy just to say, okay, I want these space, this density, this many inches or feet on center. Here's the plants, click, done in one click, because it seems a little redundant to do that. And if I demonstrate this over here, you know, I could come in, you kind of saw how much time that took. I go back here, maybe down to, now if I want to paint a variety of, individually place a variety of plants in here, I can hold the control key down and select more than one. And now, when I come in here, I can actually place these wherever I want, and I can click pretty fast. So you can come in here and place those trees. By the time you set all those scatter groups up, And I have the ability here to say, okay, well, basic from the view that I'm taking, I can have these denser at the front and thinned out at the back. And, you know, when I take a view from down here, they look pretty filled in. So that way I don't have to completely fill it in and have more plants than I really need. So if you keep track of the time, you can see how much time it took me to fill this whole area in just by individually clicking versus using the scatter tool. With the scatter tool, however, if you come back up, you know, it's kind of easier to manage. I've got a group of scattered vegetation. I just click on there, and then if I want to do some erasing, same thing. I choose this, pick the eraser, a little big. Let's go down to 2 feet maybe, and then I can come in here and just click and drag over these if I want to thin them out a little bit, get them back from the edge. And you can also do the scatter remove. Maybe I need to reselect these. Which again doesn't seem to be taking a whole lot of plants out at the same time. So I don't usually use that. I just use the eraser. Sometimes, for example, I don't know if I didn't do it in this one, but if you're using shrubs, like this landform texture actually goes underneath the platform. I didn't cut it out. This platform's sitting on top of it. So something to think about in your SketchUp modeling. So if I scattered shrubs on here that were taller than this, you would see them coming through the top of the stage. So that's a case where you could just go in, however, and you know, pick your scatter vegetation, select these, take the eraser, and then go in and erase those out from under there. But if you're going to use the scatter tool in particular, you have to be really careful about separating different material textures and making sure they don't go under other things, because it will scatter it across the whole surface. It doesn't recognize that there's a stage platform here. If this pattern is underneath there, it will add it to it, and it will add it wherever it is in your model. So if you use the same material everywhere, that gets to be a problem. You just have to be careful with that. Okay, and generally speaking, I think this last section, just to finish up, is to say be careful with both the paint and the scatter tools, because they're you know, based on some algorithm, but they're not making design decisions. It's just randomly scattering plants around. And the whole point of putting plants in your design is to have them be part of your entire design scheme. They're really important design elements. You need to think about where they're placed. So that's one of my fears about things like Twinmotion and Lumion. People can use them to drop plants in really quickly wherever they want, but they're not really thinking about what they're doing. So place your plants carefully where you have, you know, big forested areas or background. Use the paint and the scatter tools to be able to fill those in quickly. But when you're really dealing with planting design at an up close scale, I would say it's better to use the individual plant placement to make sure that you get them where you want, and that you can move them around individually. That's really what Twinmotion gives you the ability to do, make those kind of design decisions in real time on the fly. Look at it from different views immediately and see whether it's actually accomplishing what you want it to in terms of its aesthetic appearance, its space making function, screening winds, screening views, all those different functional aspects of what plants, or the role plants play in the landscape. That's really what you should be thinking about, not just how quickly can I fill this in. So hopefully that'll give you a head start on how to use those plant placing tools. They're really pretty straightforward, but again, remember to keep backed up. I'll be honest with you, I tried to record this tutorial 4 times before this and crashed every time. Starting to get a little suspicion of what it was, and maybe it wasn't just the plants, but right now there have been a lot of complaints about using those tools and then starting to have crashing problems. So incremental backups, save frequently, make a copy, keep working, you'll be fine if you're careful about that. But if you're not, you can lose a lot of work. So all right, hopefully that'll work. Just one other thing, if you update your geometry after you've used the scatter and the paint tools, usually they come through, but sometimes they don't. So that's another issue. I think they're supposed to. That's the way it's supposed to work. But I've had issues with I update the geometry, and all my scatter groups are still there. So I can click on them and I see what the plant mix that I have, but none of the plants exist in the model anymore. They just disappear. And you have to go back and click and redo it. So again, if you've got the scatter group defined and you have your textures defined, it's just a matter of doing 4 or 5 clicks. It's not a big deal. It's not supposed to happen, but it does. So try to make sure your geometry is as updated as it needs to be before you start loading all the plants in. All right, I hope that helps you. Thank you.